Here are 30 architecture terms to help you improve your Minecraft building and think like an architect. Starting off with number 1, plan. Now, a plan is what would happen if you took a nice horizontal slice through a building. We got this house here for an example. And then what we have left is this sort of projection like from the top where you can see into all of the interior spaces that make up the floor. So this is really useful if you want to sort of plan out the sort of general shapes and spaces of your rooms before building up the rest of the building. So this is what it looks like when we cut this at 2 blocks off the ground. So we can cut through, we see the doors, see these walls, we've got the windows here too. And to simplify this, if you're doing sort of like, a sketch in a sketchbook, you just want to sort of draw out, have the darkest lines be these like thick exterior walls that you're cutting through, and then interior walls in Minecraft, they're going to be the same sort of thickness, but thickest, most prominent lines are going to be like the general outline of your structure, and then these lighter lines you want to make for like the interior divisions, and then the sort of lightest lines are stuff that is below what's being cut through. So from this, we can kind of, simplify this very complicated, building into spaces, and then simplify that even more, take out the color and the material, and just, sort of give us a picture of the shapes. And then we can use that to decide like, oh, we'll put a kitchen here, maybe a dining room here, bedrooms, stairs, the like. Number 2 is elevation. And we're standing all the way back here because we're trying to minimize the effect of perspective on this build here. Because the way our eyes work, we can see in 3 dimensions. And things that are closer up front appear larger. And as we move backward, things sort of appear smaller. And that kind of cues us into the 3-dimensional world we're living in. Whereas an elevation is a 2D drawing. And instead of trying to show the 3-dimensionality of a building, an elevation shows you what it looks like if everything, or what it looks like keeping everything the same size. So anything that is behind sort of the front face, you're not able to see because there's something in the way of that. So to replicate that with this build, I've taken away everything that is behind another block. And obviously, building like this doesn't make any sense, but sketching, from this orthographic 1-to-1 perspective will kind of help you get, a clue of how to, arrange the sort of shapes of your building. Number 3 is a section, and this is very similar to number 1, a plan, in that we are taking a slice through our building here, except this time we're doing a vertical slice, and we're going to show everything that's inside the building. So, much like the plan, you can see the arrangement of spaces, but this one kind of cues us into, how large these spaces are, or the sort of vertical, orientation of like the chimney here going all the way through, and sections are often used to show details. So if we want to show like exactly how this door works, we can put a cut through here, cut through the door, and show its individual components. Number 4, a partee. A partee is the simplest key idea that sort of informs your building. And so one of the most simple is 9 squares. It could be like 9 spaces arranged around each other. And so as such, I've done 2 interpretations of the sort of 9 square partee. And so this first one is kind of a classical Palladian villa where we've got this one central space, and then surrounding it are 4 sort of staircases leading up with the overhang, and then in the corners we've got sort of a garden space. And second idea is sort of like this moon base type deal where we also have 9 separate spaces, this garden in the middle, and then these 9 irregular sort of structures surrounding it. And these two both follow the same sort of key idea, but sort of differ in their execution. A partie is like your main idea, but it's separate from like the sort of decorative aspects. It's more of the form and the way things are arranged, and can be used to like explain the why without having to go into the finer details of like what sort of materials you're using. Number 5, massing. Massing is a tool that you can use to sort of start from very bare minimal shapes and work your way towards something more complicated. And this is something I touched on a lot in the brutalism video, but essentially what you want to do is take sort of rudimentary geometric shapes and arrange them together to create a more complicated structure that you can then assign these sort of curves to, or materials, more decorative elements that aren't like the key sort of spaces in your structure. So what I've done here is a build I did inspired by Santiago Calatrava's work with the Milwaukee Art Museum, and I've sort of brought it down to its bare essentials. We've got 2 large rectangles, one bigger than the other, stacked on top of each other, and then this sort of other rectangle that's perpendicular to the 2, and then this sort of pyramid shape on top. And compared to this is a lot more approachable, and starting with these sort of rudimentary shapes can help you move things around a lot easier, because obviously when you're working with something that's super decorated, it's hard to start from scratch, change the spaces over. But if you're working in the sort of like big sort of block format, you can very easily, especially if you have world edit, just sort of take away this, move it around, because there's no decoration attached. You're just seeing it as the shape that it is. Number 6, hierarchy. Hierarchy is a method of organization used to make the most important parts stand out. And so you can do this by altering their size, their shape, or their positioning. So for this building, we've got our most important part here up top. We've set it aside by having these bays be larger than these smaller windows down here. It's at the top, so it's at a commanding position, and color is contrasting everything around it, so our eyes are drawn there. Buildings without a clear hierarchy, with multiple sort of areas of high visual interest that are all commanding attention, will read as sort of disorganized. And so having areas of greater visual interest and then lesser visual interest will create a composition that's more stable and easier to read. Number 7 is scale. And scale refers to how the built environment sort of shapes up compared to the people and the things that interact with it. And so here, this column is kind of at a 1-to-1 scale, where my Minecraft person being 2 blocks tall and 1 block being a meter, this is about 9 meters tall. And then this is sort of a grandiose scale, where this is like 3 meters wide and super duper tall. And then this is even greater, a monumental scale, and it's absurdly tall. Now, the scale you want to put your builds at can often depend. Obviously, at a larger scale, you can fit a lot more detail in, but at you kind of lose the human aspect that you get at a smaller scale. Number 8, proportion. Proportion is the ratio between 2 measurements. So here, this is about 15 blocks by 30 blocks, which divided would be 1 block tall for every 2 blocks wide. And repeating proportions can often provide a sense of unity and harmony into your builds. And so here, the windows are the same sort of proportion as the greater, wall itself. And so these windows are 2 blocks wide and 4 blocks tall, which is, another 1-to-2 proportion. And proportion that you're going to see a lot is the sort of golden ratio. This is where the long over the short side is equal to the long plus short over the long side. And that comes out to about a ratio of 1 to every 1.618, which is roughly, about a 3 by 5 rectangle. And so what this really means is not a lot, but it's sort of a commonly agreed upon proportion that looks good to the human eye, and it's used in a lot of especially like Renaissance and classical architecture, but it's something that you can call upon to add a sense of harmony into your builds. Number 9 is program, and program is the literal function of whatever sort of spaces you're creating. So for a Minecraft example, you have a storage room, a furnace, some farms, maybe a bed, animals, and a nether portal, and these all occupy a certain predetermined amount of space that you need to sort of work into your structure. And so there's really two methods you could approach. You could lay out these sort of spaces and then sort of build your structure around them, or you could build a structure and then using the square footage you've got, fit in these sort of programmatic elements. So in our first example, before we even made our example, we've sort of designed or allocated how much space we're going to need for storage, for our furnaces, and for everything else. And then we're going to take those sort of layouts and the space they occupy and sort of place them around, and then we can sort of work our building around it. Whereas here, we've got our predetermined shape, and then we're going to figure out, okay, well, we don't need it to be this exact size, so we can fit in our storage here, furnace here, the like, and just sort of work that same sort of square footage in for those needs. And this obviously applies to way more than just your Minecrafty needs. If you've got like an office building and you need a certain amount of square footage for offices, certain amount for a meeting room, for the break room, that sort of dimension. And so using like the large space you've been given, you can sort of divide that into adequate spaces for all of your needs. Now, the other important part besides program is the circulation spaces, and these make up every sort of space that isn't occupied by some sort of function. And so to explain the sort of circulation space, I've set up this little village. We're going to see if it works like I want it to. These guys are a little dumb, but villagers have pathfinding built in, and so at noon they'll go to their job. At afternoon, here, oh boy, there we go. In the afternoon, they're going to want to meet up at the bell here, and so they're all going to leave their programmatic workspaces and enter the circulation space and meet up at their next programmatic space. You can see here you want your circulation spaces to be easily accessible and navigable. You don't want to have a sort of maze-like structure where it's hard to get from A to B. And having sort of hallways wasn't always the case. In a lot of classical architecture, pre-modern, you often had rooms that were just sitting next to each other that you sort of had to walk through. And the hallway is kind of a relatively new invention that allows for these spaces to sort of be separate and have dedicated space to sort of circulate around. And we'll try it one more time. We're going to set these guys to night, and they'll use the space again to go to their assigned bedroom. Number 11 is progression, and having a sort of progression of spaces, sort of a sequence of spaces that you want to travel through that lead the person into, the final space. And so there's a lot of ways you can do this. The dumbest and easiest would just be to have like a blue line you can follow on the ground. But there's sort of more natural and ways you can sort of like guide someone along and like without them knowing kind of cue them into a space. And that includes light and color and the ability to kind of peek over and see that there's something more beyond like a corner, or peeking up above what they can currently see. And so you can kind of combine all these elements. You can see here I actually do have a bit of a line here with the leaves to sort of cue people in from this sort of villa space into this kind of cramped alleyway that you normally really wouldn't want to be in, but because of the light, because of this bright blue overhang, you want to kind of peek and see what's around the corner, and that leads us to this fountain space. Number 12 is symmetry, and there are two types of symmetry. Axial symmetry, where something is symmetric about an axis or a line. So if I fly up to the top here, you can see that this building is symmetrical along this line here through the middle, where everything on this side is the exact same mirrored on the other side. And then the second type is radial symmetry, which this building also is, where everything is symmetric about a point here in the center and then rotated around. Number 13 is asymmetry, which you might expect is the opposite of symmetry. But a technique that you might want to use when making an asymmetric sort of building is balancing the sort of visual weight. It's just the amount of interest that each half or section has. So here, this section is obviously larger, but it's not as tall, and I've added the vertical glass panes along this one. So while this section is smaller, it is like larger in some aspects, and it's got a little bit more visual interest to kind of keep the composition balanced. And a symmetrical sort of building will often read as more stable, whereas an asymmetric building has more movement to it. Your eye kind of, bounces around because not everything's the same. And this one is a little different on the back too, where in the front it was kind of angled backwards. On this side, this part's kind of angled out. Seems like it's kind of jumping up. This one is still, stout and vertical. So asymmetry kind of offers a lot more variation. Neither one nor the other is, better, but depending on the type of composition you want to create, either a symmetric or an asymmetric composition will help you out. Number 14 is an additive composition. Calling back to massing here, an additive composition starts with maybe one or two shapes, and then you sort of, add more on top of that. So for this sort of boxing ring I made, we've got this large sort of dome, or not dome, but barrel vaulted center space, and then we've added another rectangle on the back, one on the front, and then this one for the roof, and the combination of those creates this sort of complete structure. Let me just show you the inside. And these sort of compositions can feel a little segmented because we've got all of these individual spaces that have different, size roofs and kind of read as their own separate spaces. Number 15 is a subtractive composition, and this works largely in an opposite way to the additive composition. We start with one large mass, and then you sort of, chip away like you're carving into something. So we started with the rectangle here, and then we've cut out these sort of step backs along each side to sort of give this stepped shape. So the final composition reads as one sort of block that's been cut into, and then these sort of terraces are able to be built upon. Because we've got kind of the same this is sort of a flat wall, reads more as subtractive than additive, as only part of it has been carved into. Number 16 is transparency. And now typically the use case of a window is for somewhere that you want to have a hole in the wall for fresh air, light to be able to get in, but it's not very practical to have a physical hole in the wall. Then you want to throw in a glass window. And so literal transparency is just that, having glass to kind of provide some of the aspects of a hole in the wall, letting the light and the view come through without actually having to have a hole. Whereas phenomenal transparency is sort of having spaces overlap. And so we've got two kind of contrasting sort of builds here, this sort of traditional house and then this futuristic cube thing, and they're sort of placed on top of one another. And this sort of in-between space is neither one nor the other, but a part of both. And it's phenomenally transparent in the fact that when you're in here, you're sort of in the two spaces at once. Number 17 is contrast. And contrast refers to the relative lightness or darkness of a color. It's not to be confused with opposite hues. So, for example, yellow and purple are complementary colors because they have opposite hues, whereas green and red are also complementary colors because they too are on opposite ends. But yellow and purple contrast each other, whereas red and green do not. And to show that, I'll throw this video into grayscale right now, and you can see that on the left, the red and the green are very similar sort of value, the relative lightness or darkness, whereas the yellow and the purple on the right are very, very different. And sorry about that. You can use this to your advantage by either calling this contrast into attention or sort of not having a very contrasting sort of composition. And so if you want to call attention to something, contrast is a great way to do that. Whereas if you just want to, have it be part of the background, you want to use colors that are very similar in value. And to show you the effects of contrast, something that has a lot of contrast will read as very, very busy and hard to look at. Whereas if you just use a little bit of contrast, it'll draw your eye to it without being too overwhelming. Number 18 is modular. And having modules in your design allows you to create large sort of builds without having to worry about the individual details of each part. So you can either have one single module that you want to repeat in a variety of patterns, or you can create sort of a kit of parts and create multiple sort of parts that can be put together and fit together, similar to like, a Lego set that can be used to create a variety of bigger structures. And so here, I've used just a flat wall, a corner, and an inside corner to create the sort of framework for this greenhouse. And then from there, I can create a roof design, fill it in, and the bulk of the design really only happened right here when I made the smaller parts. It's a way to really simplify and think about like the bare essentials of your design. Number 19 is Tectonics, and this is a sort of detail that highlights the way different pieces are connected to one another. So in this example, some sort of metal sort of beam structure has like these bolts that are connecting the different parts, and we're detailing these to call attention to the way that these pieces are connected and that the forces are acting upon it. And similar here, we've got these wooden sort of lattice structures, and we're detailing how these pieces would come together, they would attach, and highlighting that sort of structural component as the main detail. Number 20 is ornament. An ornament is a sort of sculptural element incorporated into a building to embellish it. And so it's not very common in like modern kind of white box style architecture, but in a lot of like masonry heavy styles, there's a lot of ornament. And this building is an example. You'll see a lot of it up towards the sort of roof here, where we've got multiple layers of detail. And then this one also has this sort of intermediate level that's got a lot more ornament. We've got this sort of decorative window here, and this center stripe is also set back. And this is another building I designed that's also got heavy ornament here on the lower level, where we're using walls and stairs to create this sort of interesting pattern that's like carved into the stonework. Ornament differs from decoration in the sense that ornament is sort of built into the structure, whereas decoration is kind of added on top of it. This could be like a statue that's kind of carved into a column compared to a painting that you hang up. One of them is an inherent part of the structure that should sort of, match with the themes you're building with, whereas one is from something that you can swap out, you can change. It's not as integral to the building itself. Number 21 is a facade, and this is the sort of built application of the elevation from earlier. It's just the sort of front or street-facing side of a building. And a building can have multiple facades. Depends if it's like a row house that is, only has one side facing the street compared to something that stands on its own and has four sides that face the outside world. But a facade is just the term used to describe that sort of outward face. And so here we've got just the facade of a movie theater. Everything else here is gone. But often this is the most important sort of face of a building that sort of gives it its character. Number 22 is load bearing. And to understand this, you need to understand the two types of forces, compressive and tensile. Compressive forces are the result of, like for example, in masonry construction, these bricks are stacked up on top of one another and they're all pushing each other down. And so brick and stone are really, really super strong in compression, where you can stack them up fairly high and just the load of gravity will keep them together. And so in a masonry building and most older structures, you're not going to get huge spans, but they're going to have very thick walls and relatively thin, narrow windows. Horizontal spans are where you're going to have a lot more tensile forces, and stone is not very good at that. So in order to get more tensile forces, you might want to use wood, or if you're in a more modern style, these sort of iron framed construction or steel. And obviously in Minecraft, gravity doesn't exist, there are no forces. But if you're aiming for a more realistic style, you try and consider what sort of forces are going to be acting upon your building in order to make it feel more believable. And in a timber frame construction, these sort of outer walls are going to be load bearing, and so they should extend all the way to the ground. And then the walls that are parallel to the gable of the roof, they are going to be load bearing ones. And so any sort of beam that comes down either should extend all the way down to the ground, or if it comes down, there should be a beam here if you don't want a wall that runs the same length. And so you can have a horizontal beam that then meets a column at some point. Number 23 is a column grid. And this is a simple way of organizing the structure in your building and allows you to be more creative with your wall placement. So simple column grid, we've got 4x4 here, and then we just stack it up, and then we've got beams running in both directions. This helps us with number 24, a free plan. You may also hear this described as an open plan, but it doesn't necessarily have to be open per se. It just means that because the structure is all falling on this grid of columns, you can do whatever you want with the walls. And so this is kind of my knockoff Villa Sauvois, and I've got this sort of first floor planned out in the blue here, and my second floor planned out in the orange. And because all the structures on this column, or these columns, this wall doesn't need to do anything structurally. That's the whole point of it being free. You can do whatever you want with them because it's not actually supporting the weight of the building. That is all on these structural elements. And so the second floor, we can do whatever we like with it too. And so we can have, openings, horizontal windows, which I'll touch on in a sec, and walls wherever we'd like. Number 25 is the free facade, and this is similar to the free plan in that it is brought about by having this structural element that is separate from the exterior walls of the building. So with a traditional load-bearing wall, you can't have these large expansive windows without some kind of reinforcement. This is where the lintel comes in. It's the part that sits above a window and sort of overlaps on either side so that the weight of the brick or wall above it doesn't come down and crash into your window. And it's really hard to have these large sort of windows in a load-bearing wall because obviously that load has to go somewhere, and if you've got a wide expanse, it's just going to come down and totally crash. Now, a free facade is able to have these sort of ribbon windows that stretch horizontally because all of the structure is behind here and it's being held up by these columns and the beams inside, and so you're free to do whatever you want with the facade. It's also called the curtain wall because it's just kind of being draped off of the actual structure. It's not really holding itself up. And so you can have, long horizontal windows, you can have it be one big window, or you can do whatever you'd like with it. The point is that the structure is separate from the window or the wall, and now it's free to do whatever instead of having to hold up the building itself. Number 26 is a cantilever. And if you'll excuse my knockoff falling water here, a cantilever is a large sort of horizontal projection that's only supported at one end, and it's sort of, floating on the other end. And this is a lot easier to do in Minecraft than it is in real life, because obviously in real life you're going to have to put some reinforcements in here to keep the forces from having this tip over. In Minecraft there's no gravity, you can do what you like with it. But this sort of adds an extra element of, weightlessness and, mysteriousness to your sort of builds, and give it kind of an otherworldly quality, as long as you're not being completely unreasonable with it and having it stick out, like 5 miles in one direction. Giving it some kind of plausibility adds a lot to the sort of structure as a whole. And for my falling water example here, Frank Lloyd Wright put a cantilever over this sort of waterfall in order to, situate the house in the actual landscape itself. It's really, really a masterpiece, and this does not do it justice. Number 27 is form following function, and this is the sort of style of thinking that a building should be designed around its primary purpose, which, doesn't sound too crazy. So this small example, let's say we're making a public bathroom. Obviously, the thing that's most important is a toilet in the bathroom and the sinks. Always wash your hands. So by building out our toilet and our sink, we know what the form or what the function is going to be, how much space it's going to take up, and we can inform our design by having it be built around the dimensions of these components. It's similar to our module and our program, but obviously it's not comprised solely of toilets, and program is more of a general sort of this much square footage for bathroom, whereas this is how much square footage does each toilet take up, what's the shape of it, and building your bathroom around having these 4 toilets lined up, one right here, and then you can put the sink here, and by pasting those in, you can see that they all fit very nicely, good amount of space, and then we can create the form of our building around that. So here is the same sort of shape. We've added a little bit extra on here, so you can walk in, there's a trash can, and then these toilets are easily accessible, the hallway's nice and big, and the washroom's nice, and we've got these windows up here, which also help out the function. They bring in some light, but they don't compromise the actual, goal of the building, which is to have a safe and secure private bathroom, and so you can't see in, really. There's no angle where you can peep in, and it's not putting these people on full display while they're doing number 2. So this building is a prime example of form function coming first and form following. And it's a nice way to add like some logic and inform your decisions other than just making a shape and then deciding what to fill it in with later. Number 28 is accessibility. And I mean this in two sort of ways. The first is literal ADA compliance, if you're interested in doing that. For example, the most important one, having a wheelchair ramp. For every 1 foot or block of height you want to gain, you need 12 feet or blocks of length. And so an ADA accessible wheelchair ramp will be 12 blocks long for every 1 block it rises. And one other thing that's important to have is that the landing of your staircase should be as wide as your staircase. That way, when you're walking up, you're not immediately cramped if this was only 1 block wide. You've got the full width of the staircase to walk around. And then, one other thing is that pathfinding in your spaces should be intuitive and not a hindrance. So if you had, a courtyard here and you needed to get from point A to point B, you don't want to have to walk on this meandering path when what you really want to do is walk in a straight line like this. And so when you're designing your circulation spaces or the pathing between different buildings, different areas, you want to have it be as intuitive as possible. If you need to go around something, there should be a clear reason for it, and not just because it looks kind of pretty when the path is all windy. Number 29 is irony. And irony sort of plays on our preconceived expectations. So in this first example here, we've got these ironic columns that do not do the function of a column, which is to support. And so there's this gap here that kind of signifies that this is not doing what we expect it to do. And another way you can do it is with an extreme contrast. So we've got this sort of monolithic skyscraper, and then this cutesy little house in here, almost reminiscent of like Up, or the very real examples where someone's house, they don't sell their house, and then developers sort of build around it, can provide some kind of ironic contrast. Or another way to do it is to play with our sort of stereotypes and expectations. For example, Robert Venturi in his guild house put this decorative TV aerial on the top. It doesn't actually function, but it's just a sculpture. But the building is like a senior living community, and he was playing on the joke that old people love to watch TV, so he's got a sculpture on the top of a TV aerial. And finally, number 30 is vernacular, and this is in sort of opposition to the international style. Got an example here, which is sort of that kind of white box style that you see everywhere that doesn't give a damn about where it's placed. They all sort of kind of look the same. Vernacular architecture is sort of the local style that is based on the weather conditions and the local materials and the sort of terrain and environment that surround a building. And so, for example, in a desert, got an arid climate, obviously you're going to not have a lot of wood to build with, so you're going to have a lot more earthen construction, and you're going to have flat roofs because they don't get a lot of rain in a desert, and so you want to kind of have a flat, livable space on your roof that you can hang out in the daytime to cool off a bit. And compare that to a sort of more, frigid climate, one that gets a lot of snow. You want a tall vertical roof that won't let snow pile up on top of it and collapse. And in those sort of climates, wood is definitely a lot more abundant, so you're going to see a lot more of that sort of material here. This also sort of informs the way buildings are designed. In like a hot climate, you're going to want to try and let heat out, whereas in a colder climate, your buildings are going to want to be designed to keep heat in. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more just like it. Let me know down in the comments if there's anything else you'd like to see. I'd like to do a little bit more like this one compared to my style videos. I think having a healthy mix of the two is going to be good. Because obviously architecture is more than just, the sort of style categories that everything falls into. And it's really a lot more about problem solving and kind of suiting the environmental circumstances that surround a building. And so, the style ones are nice and catchy, but I feel like having a good mixture will be good overall, especially if you want to, get into the field of architecture and, sort of explore that career path. So, yeah, that'll do it. Catch you around, guys.